Welcome back to Point Counterpoint, a mini-series for the Beirut Banyan, co-hosted by Michael Young and Bashshar Haydar. Michael Young is a senior editor at Carnegie's Middle East Center and the editor of Diwan. Bashshar Haydar is a professor of philosophy at AUB, both voices offering unique perspective and at times nuanced disagreement on current affairs. An important disclaimer, this episode is recorded on Wednesday, February 5, prior to any official list emerging with respect to the cabinet formation. And the three topics covered include the cabinet formation process itself, and Nawaf Salam's incoming government, and what to expect with regards to the finance ministry and whether or not Harakat Amal will succeed in maintaining their position in that ministry. The second topic covers the presidency, security, and how the ceasefire is playing out at a time when the Israelis remain in the south, and what that looks like in the medium term for Hezbollah south of the Litani and north. And the third topic will cover the 20-year commemoration of Rafic Hariri's assassination and the rise and fall of Iran's leverage in Lebanon, expressed through Hezbollah. And before we get to the episode, if you're enjoying this podcast, please hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, like the episode, leave a comment. Engagement helps. And if you enjoy the podcast and are willing to help contribute, this podcast is completely independent and relies on donations. There are links via PayPal and Patreon in the details box below. Any contribution helps keep this podcast going. And now, Point Counterpoint, Episode 3.
The optics were not good, because it looked like Nawaf is giving what the Shia dudes want, and later having to respond to the complaints of the others. As if he's inclined first, his priority is to satisfy them and give the others less than a fair deal until they complain. So they had to push their way in, rather than what they assume to be their case is that actually they were going to be listened to first, since these are the parties and the groups that brought Nawaf to this position, and will cater for the Amal and Hezbollah after that. Now, I think had he done it differently, had he approached them all at the same time and doesn't settle one side and keep the others to deal with the leftovers, would have looked much better.
So
Now,
optics-wise, it's not a success so far.
Not success. And optics sometimes might reveal something. People are suspicious. These are not... Optics are bad because they might reveal tendencies, inclination, dispositions that people are starting to be worried about.
And Michael, a recent piece you wrote for Carnegie in a way builds on that. And of course, that this is now 3 weeks into the government formation process, where it's almost like a missed opportunity, where Nawaf Salam had the majority behind him. He also had the president behind him, or at least appeared that way 3 weeks ago, to push in a majority government that didn't necessarily need to include Harakat Amal or Hezbollah, or for that matter, anyone. He could have gone on his own path and he would have probably succeeded. 3 weeks later, we have this optics dilemma that all of us are talking about in different ways. Do you see the government process so far as one that has disappointed you, as somebody who maybe had expectations for Nawaf Salam, or do you see this as just Lebanese politics playing out?
No, not really. I see this as Lebanese politics playing out. And the paradox is that the fact that he began his negotiations with the Shia duo, and as Bashshar was saying, the other parties complained about it. Paradoxically, it seems that they got a good deal out of complaining, because if the news today is correct, and we'll see, the Lebanese forces get a sovereign ministry, including the Foreign Affairs Ministry, which was initially said to be in the president's, if you will, share. They also get two very lucrative ministries, telecoms and energy, and they get the industry ministry, which is maybe less impressive. And so I think that there's a tendency in Lebanon, even if I agree that the optics may have been problematic. I mean, there are other things that I think Nawaf could have done differently and in a way not created ill will. But I think a lot of this ill will was manufactured, because everyone was trying to get the most out of the negotiating process. Now, once the government is formed, this will probably more or less be forgotten. if his government can function.
May I push back on this point? Do you think there's a handicapped issue for him anyway? Even when we look back and say that this is a short-term scenario that we'll get out of, building on what Bashshar said, that there could be the perceived intention of being too close to his opposition. In other words, 3 weeks is a bit too long given how high our expectations are. Do you think that may hurt his chances in keeping the majority coalition intact, the one that believed in him and brought him in?
Look, I mean, I think even from the beginning, initially the Lebanese forces did not want Bashshar. Forgive me. They didn't want. Of course, they should want.
Nobody wants Bashshar.
They should want Bashshar.
I think actually.
But I mean, no one wanted the Nawaf. Initially, the Lebanese forces. He was not one of their. Nawaf was not their candidate. They had two other candidates, and the relationship with Nawaf has never been really that great. Although at one time. But the thing is, Nawaf began with a handicap, yes, absolutely. And the handicap is that he's someone who comes from outside although he's from a very prominent political family, but he was not really in politics. He's not been a member of parliament. He was more associated with civil society. He was an appointee as ambassador to the UN and so on and so forth. So I think for many members of the political class, there was an instinctive, shall I say, resistance to him, because they only like their own at the end of the day. So they didn't really know where he was coming from. Look, I think we have to be honest, 3 weeks is not a long time. Let's understand the country is still very divided. And
it would be a record, actually, if he succeeded.
Precisely. I think it will be a record. And he established these 4 conditions, which in a way, if he meets them, they're actually quite good. So I'm not as negative on him as some people are. I think he could have done certain things a bit better. But will he control his government? That's an essential question. Frankly, I think that a big role will be, and this is an interesting thing we have to think about. We're entering into a phase where we're going back to a little bit the situation in 1998 when Emil Lahoud came. And I'm not suggesting that Joseph Aoun is Emil Lahoud, but I mean that for the first time in 1980, that's not a bad thing necessarily. But the point I'm making is in 1998 there was a Ta'if, after being basically where you had a very strong prime minister and a fairly weak president, we went back to a stronger president in terms of his relationship with the prime minister. I have a feeling that we're seeing that again today with Joseph Aoun. Joseph Aoun will, by all accounts, maintain the main security ministries. Even the interior ministry, it will be someone he will be naming in accordance with Nawaf Salam. But he wants to concentrate all security issues in his hands. So you're going to have a strong president, and he's a president who has a lot of popular credibility up to now, whereas Nawaf still is in the process of creating credibility.
Let me, if you don't mind, I'll interrupt here and actually ask you, Bashshar, on the point of the early stage of potentially forming a smaller cabinet with the president behind him, and not having to worry about placating to the Lebanese forces or reassuring the Amal movement. Do you think there was a missed opportunity early on for him?
Yeah, I don't have strong opinions about that, actually. I mean, there is a justification for trying to give some role to the political parties that won elections. You can't ignore elections and say, look, I'm going to form a government outside all these people who won the votes of the Lebanese people. No matter what, because there was elections after 2019, so so there is a kind of some level of legitimacy for this parliament. No matter what the Lebanese people think, they voted for it, so they can, and therefore it makes, if you can get your government to function while including them, it's better than not including them, because these are elected members, and political process requires that. You can, however, or they could have, however, say, look, there are some ministries that are going to reserve for ourselves. These are important for the functioning of the and in this case would be finance and defense, for example, because one is to do with the implementation of the 1701 and the ceasefire agreement, and the other one has to do with the structural reforms and the rebuilding. So you could have done that and say the rest I'm going to be able to distribute, or at least try to distribute in a fair way on the rest of the political parties. So I don't think the idea of clearly, it wasn't, in my opinion, clearly a better idea, but it was to kind of this kind of government that is independent of all parties. I'm not against it, but I'm not necessarily thinking this is a great missed opportunity. What would be a missed opportunity, in my opinion, if the government could not deliver the basic things, which is disarmament. It's essential for the next phase of our political life is to work with parties that are equal in terms of nobody has access to weapons that can impose their will on their own people and on others. Second is a government that allows to have for agreements with the international community, get investment, get an IMF deal that allows investors to have trust and rebuild as well the aftermath of the war. These things that the Lebanese people need, and the fear here is that would this government be able to deliver that, or would the way it's formed allow the losers from the war to regain some of their power? I doubt they will gain the whole power, of course, especially the weapons, but they might be able to say, look, money to our community passes through us, and therefore we ensure that we have a grip on that community. It's not going through the government, and that makes a difference for the next elections.
Please, yeah.
Sorry, just on this point, if I can interject. Money will not come if it's going to pass through the parties. The money will come with conditions. The money will not come if it's going to serve to re-strengthen Hezbollah's relationship with its community. It won't come. And I think that we should be aware of this. And if there is an effort to block reform, there may very well be. I'm not saying reform is coming, but all this is going to do is delay money coming in and reconstruction. In other words, there's a price to pay today that we can't ignore, and that the duo, especially Hezbollah, cannot ignore.
Yeah.
It's that anything they do to block progress in the system is going to could turn back against them.
I just want to emphasize my agreement with Michael, and this also brings back the point that the guarantee for the success is not the conduct of the Lebanese politicians or communities. The guarantor of that success is the outside. It's the international community when it comes to reforms and rebuilding, and it's unfortunately Israel when it comes to disarmament.
Prior to that, though, I want to just insert my own thought here on whether or not Yassin Jabir will be an obstacle to this kind of aid, whether or not Yassin Jabir would be an obstacle to Nawaf Salam and Joseph Aoun.
Look, I think there are several levels here. I mean, Yassin Jabir, first of all, Yassin Jabir is not known as a gangster. I mean, he's a decent man, right. And he has been, in the past, he's talked to the IMF and to others. I don't think Yassin Jabir, on a personal level, wants to block things. Mm-hmm. But, the ministry, ministers don't control their entire ministry, and they don't control parliament. In other words, to put everything on the back of the finance minister himself is, may not necessarily be accurate. But the point, go back to my previous point, any blockage, if there is blockage, it'll come, let's say it's coming from the Speaker of Parliament, Nabih Berri. Berri will block at several levels. I mean, he has people in the ministry who can block whatever the minister says. He has, of course, control over Parliament to a significant extent and over the committees. So he has a way of blocking any kind of progress. in the legislature, in terms of legislation. So, I mean, we shouldn't put all our attention on the finance minister. And but as I said, there is a price to pay if Birri does try to play a game of blocking reforms. And as I said, coming back to another point, if we do block reforms, we're not going to get money. I mean, everyone's watching us very carefully. Lebanon is under an effective form of trusteeship at several levels, whether it's a de facto trusteeship. There is a security trusteeship, which includes the United States and Israel. There is an economic trusteeship, which includes international financial institutions, the Europeans, and the Gulf states. All these people are watching us closely. So we can play our games, but at the end of the day, if we don't do what they're asked us to do, there will be repercussions.
It's difficult for Joseph Aoun and the army not to deliver, because the price will be heavy for that. So they have to deliver. And that's what they're going to tell Hezbollah, that it's not us alone that wants to do that. You know, it's better that we do it ourselves than the Israelis do it, and that Hezbollah, something that Hezbollah understands as well. So this will make the task easier, had it not been for this situation. The question now is there going to be a dragging back and forth? Every step there's a bargaining, and therefore the Israelis stay longer in the south to make sure that this, we haven't seen this yet. They're waiting for the government to be formed. They're waiting for the army to be fully ready to implement this. In the meantime, Hezbollah is trying to create victories through the marches, which in my opinion demonstrate the weakness of Hezbollah, because now they can no longer claim that their weapons are liberating. It's like these armed, civilians, unarmed civilians doing it, whether successfully or not. So in a way, it's a sign of weakness. At the same time, they want to push this rhetoric that we are doing things ourselves, we are liberating our land. It's not the agreement that's doing that. And the Israelis are saying, look, we're not leaving until we get guarantees that the arms will not come back. So it's going to be back and forth for some time. Maybe the Israelis will withdraw, but they will still operate. They can still strike, even if they leave the territories altogether. So the more Aoun is effective and the army is effective in implementing the agreement, the less problematic it is for the people living in the south and for the rest of the country. So I think the incentives for both, for the president and for Hezbollah to comply, is strong. They have no other way to escape. I cannot see them wiggling their way out of this. What they want to do is to position themselves, is to have a posture of power to make sure and delivery, whether on the rebuilding or in the withdrawal of Israel. They want to position themselves that they have created that. They pushed Israel out and they delivered on the rebuilding, so that come next elections, they can maintain their grip on the community. Best scenario, that they maintain the 27 Shiite seats for them, or if they lose very few, so they can still claim that we have a command over the community. That's, I think, their aim, until something happens in the region, maybe.
So, and in that sense, and building on what you said already, Bashshar, that Joseph Aoun has been president and has already dealt with a level of instability in the south, and 25 civilians killed by the Israelis some 2 weeks ago now, along with the motorcycle or the scooter parade, if you will, through Ashrafi and other places. Joseph Aoun, to me, has at least symbolically met the expectations for the moment, and that includes his posturing with Hezbollah on day one, sort of demanding that they come to the presidential palace, they don't get special treatment the following day. These things are maybe more symbolic than anything, but I think they resonate well. Do you read Joseph Aoun as somebody who's maybe meeting the expectations of the moment, but particularly on security?
At this point, the process is running itself. In other words, the we're in the stages of implementation of 1701. The army is expanding its control over the south as the Israelis pull out. But, I go back to, again, something I said. We are under an international eye. What's taking place is not, we cannot put everything at the door of Joseph Aoun or Nawaf Salam. You've got the Americans, you've got the Israelis, you've got the Lebanese, you've got the French. Everyone, in a way, is pushing for an outcome that was imposed essentially on Lebanon at the end of this defeat by Hezbollah. And it was a defeat. So, in that sense, I think that Joseph Aoun, is the instrument of, he basically concentrates in himself the expectations of the international community. And he's going to continue to try to do that, of course. Which is why maybe I think what I was trying to say earlier, Nawaf, despite all my respect for him, but at the end of the day, he's a secondary character in a play that has been written for Joseph Aoun. Why? Because Joseph Aoun still has influence over the one institution that can fill the vacuum left by Hezbollah. Whereas Nawaf, in a year's time, a bit more, he may well have to go home at the end when new elections come around. But there's something else that we don't know yet. It's the political ambitions of the president. There is clearly in Joseph Aoun a political ambition to anchor himself in parliament and try to get support through the elections of next year as a way of consolidating his position and the position of his agenda. And this is, I think, going to be very interesting to watch because several of his allies today on the Christian side are worried about him.
His allies, meaning the groups that...
Well, I mean, those who voted for him,
right, yeah.
The Lebanese forces, the Kataib, voted for him. But they're worried about him. The FPM, the Aounists, did not vote for him. But they're even more worried about him. But everyone is a bit worried that he's going to eat into their base of support.
Can I ask you, Michael, how do you see that happening? I was thinking about this earlier, that Lebanese forces did not really warm up to him until the last
They
stretch.
didn't want his election.
Right.
They did not.
So how does that play out politically? Do you see him as representing a new Christian movement?
Not really. Look, let's be clear. None of the political parties wanted Joseph Aoun. Joseph Aoun was basically brought in, as Bashshar was saying, from outside. Outside the political structure, the political parties did not want him. And the Christian political parties particularly were worried that he would fill the gap, that he would actually fill the gap left by the Aounists and sort of expand from there. And if you know, many of the people around him are basically former Aounists.
So it's in a way intruding on Gibran's turf.
Definitely Gibran, but I think the Lebanese forces and Kataib are also worried about him because he is popular in the Christian community. So we have to see how he manages in the coming year or so to basically retain on the one side continued support from the Christian parties and at the same time plan ahead to sort of bring to Parliament a bloc of supporters who can then allow him to address the issues which I believe Bashshar was mentioning, the talk about disarming or the strategy difa'iyya on with Hezbollah. I don't see this taking place under the Nawaf's government, frankly. I don't see this. I think that first the government has to start rebuilding the destroyed areas of Lebanon, which are primarily Shia areas, before he can embark on any kind of discussion on the weapons. And he's not going to embark on such a discussion, I feel, with what is for the moment a transitory government. He will want to consolidate his position in the elections of next year and then begin this process.
That sounds like the healthy version of Lebanese politics we've been wanting for a long time. He sees his ambitions through elections, and next year he may even have a few MPs that fully support him.
True, but it's also possible that next year Hezbollah will be able to regain some ground and be in a better position to resist something.
That's actually a nice way to bring it back to you, Bashshar. That scenario, and you've said it several times in different ways, that the Israelis are making sure that that kind of scenario doesn't emerge easily. Do you read it the way Michael is saying it, that it's a play written for Joseph Aoun, using your words, Michael, but also that the threat of Hezbollah's re-emergence is still there?
Well, there are two threats. One is to re-emerge militarily. I think this is very unlikely. This is.
I agree with him.
Given the change in the region as well, in Syria and all of the other changes, and the failure itself, you can't mobilize the community after that kind of defeat. The other one is to be able to have the same kind of grip over the community, either through a sense of victimhood of some sort, and also a sense that they can deliver on that ground. They can deliver to the community a sense of empowerment, not necessarily with the weapons, but some kind of veto power they can have over the process, or a level of veto power that gives them a sense of empowerment, and they acknowledge that this empowerment comes through the Amal Hezbollah alliance. So, and why is that a problem? Because I think reform in Lebanon, there are hanging fruits in reform in Lebanon. Deal with the IMF, money comes from abroad, restructuring the banking sector, people will see some of their assets coming back, investors will come in. That kind of stuff is low-hanging fruit in the sense they should have happened a long time ago, since the collapse. And Hezbollah and their allies prevented that. It wasn't in their interest to get into these deals for all kinds of reasons, because the conditions brought by these deals will hinder significantly the way they operate in the country. So now they maybe are unable to have this kind of create this kind of obstacle. So there is a low-hanging fruit for the government in that respect. The other stuff, which is deeper, there are two things that are deeper. One is the way politics function here. Nepotism, cronyism, all of that. That will not go away easily. That will continue. We are not going to become Norway after this. We're going to become Lebanon, but with less disastrous consequences. So we have to prepare ourselves for that. The second unhealthy thing which can change, unlike the kind of political culture that is not going to change quickly, or maybe it will never change. Maybe the best thing we can become Italy or something like that, but we'll never become, with a lot of problems and nepotisms and corruptions. But that we are happy to live with if we become Italy or Sicily, whatever it is that we can think of. The other thing is there's another unhealthy phenomenon in Lebanon, which hasn't always been the case, which is that we have a community, which is the Shiite, that they have a great level of solidarity and homogeneity and in political choice.
Come just a little closer.
And in political choice, they all vote for the political group that's allied, which is not true of other groups. The Sunnis are splintered, maybe more than they should be. The Christians are divided. These are the three main demographic groups. Druze are small community. Maybe they can't afford to be too divided. But the main three groups, only the Shiite are unanimously voting for one political side. Either that side will split, Amal Hezbollah will split, no longer allies, or that the community no longer votes for them in such a great proportion, so they can control most of the seats. This needs to be done for the sectarian alliances to break away, so that some of the Shiite will ally with some of the Christians, and some of the Sunnis will ally with the other part of the Shia. So it creates political blocks that are not dominated by a sectarian sensibilities. It will still be there, but not dominated by them. It's not like we are one group and the rest are divided, and therefore we can use our unity to impose our will on others. Because nobody in the political parties can claim that you are violating the mithaqiyya, what's called the
National Pact.
The National
the
Pact.
Spirit of the
Only the
National Pact.
Shiite can say that, because all the members of parliament are united as a one political front. This is unhealthy for the community itself and for the politics in Lebanon as well. And you can only do that by showing the community that those alliance does not deliver for them what they want to. It already failed them in the war, and therefore the message should also be continued to say that it will not deliver for you after the war. And therefore, you'd better relax your grip on the community and allow voices to emerge and allow divisions within the community, which is the same as the divisions you have in other communities. That will create a kind of a healthy mix, and it doesn't create dominant group or a victim group. The Shiites are turning from a dominant group to a victim group, but still position themselves together in one spot, either as dominant or as victims. You want to break this. You want to break that kind of solidarity for the sake of a healthy community, debate within it, and for the sake of healthy politics in Lebanon. And that is, I think, the question for me. Would this government bring this, and would it bring it in a enough fast pace to relax the politics in the country?
With that kind of the potential political evolution that Bashshar is describing, I want to take one step back towards the trusteeship playing field you outlined, where you have that security trusteeship with the Americans and the Israelis, and really almost like a police force monitoring. And then you have that economic lifeline, whether it's through the IMF or elsewhere. What would it take to keep this going? I worry that these are not necessarily guaranteed long-term scenarios, meaning that could you see a situation where the trusteeship fades, where the Israelis and the Americans are not playing that kind of role, where you have, like today, Iran nominating Naim Qasim as the Iranian representative to Lebanon?
Khamenei's representative.
Khamenei's representative, that could point in a direction that takes us back to confrontation. I'm trying to see how this trusteeship could potentially fall apart.
Look, I mean, the reason he named Naim Qasim representative is to give legitimacy to a man who has a legitimacy problem. And, we're going to have Nasrallah's funeral later this month. And again, there will be a lot of people, but it's not necessarily going to do wonders for Naim Qasim's legitimacy, because the contrast will be flagrant. So the fact that he was named now before the funeral is maybe a way of trying to prop him up a little bit.
And the funeral has been determined already? I didn't know that.
Wasn't it on the 22nd, 23rd? I'm not sure if that's the final day.
Yeah, I see. They announced it.
And it's going to happen here. It will happen in Beirut.
Well, I think Hashim Safiuddin will be in the south.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Nasrallah will be on the
Airport Road.
But I think that the thing will be together, and they will have one ceremony for that. And this ceremony is going to be important for this kind of grip over the community. It says, but how long it will last? That's a question.
Look, in terms of the trusteeship idea, that's a nice word for, as you said, basically we've got the Israelis looking at us 24 hours a day through drones and hitting the country. I don't see this, by the way, as weakening. I think the Israelis succeeded in imposing this on the this plan where they could intervene, this side letter that they agreed with the Americans. They will continue to use that as they want to maintain virtually constant oversight over the South. I don't see that changing or weakening. On the contrary, with time, their margin of maneuver can only increase, because there will be less U.S. interest in saying, okay, we want to give more credibility to the Lebanese state. But again, there is an element that's unknown here. To what extent would the Lebanese army implement its mandate in an aggressive way? And actually, I'm a bit of an optimist on this front, because I think that the Lebanese army, and Joseph Aoun in particular, has an interest in implementing its mandate. Now, what does it mean? It doesn't mean everything will be moving in with tanks and hitting people and using violence. He will negotiate, but I think it's a big part of his credibility to ensure that the army maintains fairly tight control south of the Litani.
Can I ask you, Michael, how do you imagine that negotiation process happening through Joseph Aoun? I still imagine it happening through diplomacy, less the president getting involved.
No, I mean, it doesn't mean have to be even with him. It's more a question is that when, if the army, for example, finds a arms cache, it has two options. It can destroy the arms cache, which it may do most of the time, or it may say, get rid of the arms to Hezbollah, remove them. Basically, there is a bit of an ambiguity in 1701. It says Hezbollah must remove its weapons south of the Litani. So maybe there is room. Maybe the army and the president doesn't want always to enter into confrontation with Hezbollah, I think. But at the same time, I think he will be quite insistent on ensuring that south of the Litani there is no military presence for Hezbollah. But could I just pull out
of course.
And pick up on something Bashshar said that I think is quite right. We always ask, what can Hezbollah do? They can do a lot in theory, but what is the purpose of Hezbollah having weapons along the border if it doesn't have a strategy that makes these weapons useful? This whole strategy that they adopted with Iran over the years, this Qasem Soleimani strategy of building up non-state actors around Israel, has collapsed. In other words, if they have weapons, but there isn't really, it's not part of a coordinated strategy with Iran and their other allies, in the so-called resistance axis, then the weapons are not really very useful. And as Bashshar said quite correctly, at the end of the day, the Shia community is not willing to go through another war. So even if they have weapons, there is not a lot they can do with these weapons if there's no strategy to allow them,
Maybe I can ask both of you then. I'll ask you first, Bashshar. What are these weapons there for right now? Well, Hezbollah remains an armed group north of the Litani as well. North of the Litani, I don't think we will see, and Michael, you already said this, it's unlikely that we'll see an aggressive disarmament campaign against Hezbollah anytime soon. I don't think there will be a forced de facto surrender either. So how does that play out? And why are these groups, why is Hezbollah still armed if it serves no function?
I think especially even if they're not disarmed totally, but from the south of Litani, that's even worse. What are the weapons doing north of Litani? What's their justification if they can't be on the borders, which is the case with the.
But this is what I meant.
Yeah. So
everywhere there are arms everywhere.
Everywhere. So maybe if the borders they can claim some value for them, and if you keep them above Litani, it becomes only a threat to the other Lebanese, to be used internally, and that's also not an option for the Hezb. So that kind of argument no longer is there. I think the reason why they don't come out and say there's no point for the weapons, we don't want to give them, is that first of all they want to bargain with
exactly.
That. Second is that they need time for the people to adjust. People are accepting the defeat, but they don't want to declare it. Declaring it is something else.
What would they want in return?
They have accumulated a lot of interest in the country in terms of positions in the government, privileges. They want to keep these things as much as to remain as long as possible, and to have the grip of the community as much as possible until something happens. But that will be the kind of bargain.
So this is a social, financial, and also to a degree political bargaining chip.
Could I pick up just one idea? Bashshar is saying something essential here. If there is a discussion of Hezbollah's weapons, can this take place without reopening a discussion of Ta'if? And I don't think there is. I think if you open any discussion on Hezbollah's weapons, automatically they will say, well, then let's talk about Ta'if again. And then you have a negotiation on Ta'if. Now, you may also, on the contrary, have a resistance to reopening Ta'if, which would give Hezbollah a margin of maneuver not to surrender its weapons. But I see the two as implicitly linked, and Bashshar is right. At the end of the day, their weapons are there to serve as leverage for some kind of political arrangement. Now, this is in theory.
It's interesting, though, because that's a dramatic shift from Iran to local.
Well, that was my second point. Is that we're speaking as if it's entirely a domestic issue, but the fact of the matter is that the Iranians may have a different strategy with Hezbollah, and they will, maybe their strategy is, let's go back to the Qasem Soleimani line. I don't think it is, but I think this is being very contested. But at the same time, it's conceivable that in Iran they will want to try to recreate this resistance axis in some form. Although they've lost Syria, in Iraq there is resistance to this plan. In Lebanon we saw the results. I mean, the last true believers are the Houthis in Yemen, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two uses for the weapons. One is the internal political bargaining, and the other one is going back to the old scenario, the old situation, which is you have an axis of resistance funded by Iran, weaponized. The conditions now are not suitable for that, obviously. But the Iranians might think, let's keep the weapons because something can happen. Who knows? Maybe there's a coup in Syria in years' time, and things start to be open up for the Iranians to come back. I mean, the scenarios can happen. So they want to maintain on the regional aspect, the Iranian project aspect. They want them to maintain their weapons as much as possible for that kind of scenario. At the same time, they wanted internally to maintain it for the sake of bargaining and keeping their political grip on the community internally. So, and both are not inconsistent. Both projects lie together. So in a way, there is this interest in not. Me and other Lebanese want to see a different dynamic. Want to see a Shiite discussion about criticism after defeat, or to use Sadr al-Azam, نقد بعد الهزيمة. The healthy thing for the community is to start voicing criticism after the defeat and say, was this project worth it? Was it done well? Even to the extent of saying Nasrallah did not deliver. It's not that Naim Qasim is not as good as Nasrallah. Nasrallah is not as good as Nasrallah. And therefore, as we thought Nasrallah is, that kind of criticism has not yet emerged. I mean, it may take time. It's there, but it's not pronounced because they don't want to lose more. Because if they are defeated and they start yelling at each other, this means that they actually defeated more.
The story of sectarianism and the last 2 decades and how communities express themselves always takes me back to the Ghosts of Martyrs Square, which is funny now that's part of our history. I used to think of that book as our present. Now it's our past. But we're approaching the 20-year commemoration of Rafic Hariri's assassination, and nearly 2 decades journey of seeing the rise and fall of Iran's leverage in Lebanon. Post-Syria withdrawal that has shaped and paralyzed and I think distorted also Lebanese politics in some ways permanently. And we're coming out of that. It's almost like certain characters are coming out of a coma from a trunk in a car too. When I saw Birri and Jumblat post-Assad's departure, it's quite remarkable that these characters are alive to see the end of that story too. And all of us have gotten a bit older on the way. Talking about Shia expression in politics, I'd like to go into Sunni expression too. Now with Nawaf Salam and this ever-present Saad Hariri who seems so reluctant to come back. At the same time, they're flooding the streets now, photos of him and Rafic Hariri and a return to the square. These commercials that have appeared, the likely, I don't know how big the event will be, but that he seems to be, for better or worse, where the gravity is always. And should he return next year, I would bet he would win the election and become prime minister again. So let's go there. Sectarianism at a time of, I guess, rapid security change for Lebanon. How do you see these communities expressing themselves in the coming months, and maybe with a focus also on the Sunni community?
Well, look, I think we're going to have something very interesting in February. We're going to have Nasrallah's funeral and we're going to have the 20-year commemoration of Rafic Hariri's assassination. If you recall, in 2005, there was March 8th, and then on March 14th, there was the Sunni reaction, which brought in not only Sunnis, but everyone. This time, it's in reverse. If there is a major demonstration by the Sunni community on the Rafic Hariri's anniversary of the assassination, it would be, I would guess, it would be not only a commemoration of him, but it would be an effort after the fall of the Assad regime in Syria to say we are again a leading community in Lebanon. Our marginalization, which was marked by the Hariri assassination, is now one that we can be confident in the future, because we're dominating there is a Sunni community that's been now dominating in Syria, with rapidly expanding ties with Turkey. And, you know, we want to see that on the domestic Lebanese scene. We haven't seen that up to now. I'm just saying this is one possible scenario.
So in a way, there's synergy with Syria, therefore the return of Sunni politics.
True, but there is one slight problem in the scenario. It's that, as I said, Turkey is now the major player in Syria. And Turkey and the Gulf states are not on very good terms. So do you want to isolate your traditional allies in the Gulf on behalf of this new Syria that is very close to Turkey? That's one problem. But then we have Nasrallah's funeral, which if there is a great manifestation of revival on the 14th of February, we may see again an effort to transform Nasrallah's funeral into an expression of Shia reaffirmation in the face of this Sunni affirmation. Many ifs here. I'm not saying this will happen. I'm just saying this is a possible scenario. And the fact is the society remains fundamentally sectarian. We keep all the time saying we would like to get out of sectarianism, we would like to get over the sectarian leadership, but the reality is that it remains sectarian. And if I could just modestly say, the whole point of my book was to say that sectarianism, as bad as it is, and it's really very bad, but ultimately creates the spaces, whether we like it or not, for a certain liberalism, or let's say pluralism, which has allowed Lebanon to be a bit freer than the countries in the region. And I say this about a system that I think is fundamentally terrible for Lebanon, because sectarianism has basically led us down the path to where we are today, which is disaster. But it also explains why we have these sort of pockets of pluralism in our society.
I've said this in different places. I'll say it here as well. Taking the emotions out of that word, making it less pejorative and more descriptive. I credit you and Nadim Shahadi for making me rethink that word and how it's expressed in Lebanon. And the frustrations of wanting to change the way Lebanon is governed, yet in 2025, the de facto situation is it remains a sectarian form of governance, and it probably will outlive us too. But Bashshar, we wanted to add.
Yeah, I mean, I also champion this kind of approach to sects, in the sense not only that they are bad and they have this fringe benefits of protecting us against dictatorship and allowing for pluralism because you have to cater for the needs.
Just a little closer, sorry.
Identity, whether it is ethnic or religious, or I think it's the same. You can speak in a healthy way about blacks in South Africa as a community, and that's nothing wrong. I mean, we can also speak about Sunnis or Shia here as communities. Now, the experience we had with communities, sectarian communities here, have been bad, not because these identities in themselves should be denounced, in my opinion, but because of imbalance. If one community dominates, the identity becomes poisoned. Whether it's white South African or black South African dominates, and abuse. In this case, the history is of white South African abuse their power rather than the opposite. That poisons the scenario. Or whether Kurds in Turkey or Shiite in Saudi Arabia, whoever is dominant, unless you give them a fair deal, despite their numbers, the sectarian identity becomes poisonous, and that should be taken into consideration. The second one is the neighborhood we are in, and I think this is where bringing the Syrian regime and the change. What happens the last few months is, since December 9th, I think, is something we haven't seen before. The change in the Syrian regime will change Lebanon with it, and the dynamic between sects. Now, one scenario is that the Sunnis now become the dominant force because now the Sunnis are empowered in Syria. That's not the good scenario. But there is another scenario, is that the new regime will not gain its legitimacy through, as the situation with Assad's regime, through its external adventures. That's how Assad got its legitimacy. That I have cards to play with. I control Lebanon. I try to control the Palestinian settlement, and I get my power internally and externally through controlling these elements. If a kind of democratic Syria emerges, and the justification, the legitimacy of the regime does not come from a posturing against on the Palestinian cause or supporting or maintaining power in Lebanon, you would find a different Syria, a Syria that's involved with itself, with its building itself and with its maintaining legitimacy through other means, because it's no longer needs this kind of external legitimacy. You have a majority that's ruling, doesn't need to justify its rule through other causes and other adventures, and this allows Lebanon, for the first time, to play its sectarian identities in a much less risky way and bloody way, because there's no external. The neighborhood wasn't good. I mean, we have a problem. If a family has a problem and the neighborhood is bad, that's the worst combination. Then you get criminality, you get violence, but if the family is allowed to settle its disagreements, or the groups in Lebanon allowed to settle disagreements in a peaceful way, negotiation, bargaining, with the hope that over time the sectarian identities become less and less solid, because people feel that the sects are not threatening, the other sects are not threatening them, and therefore can relax their identity and start to create identities based on other factors. Income bracket, age, ideological left and right. So you start to have a normal country not based on identities. That will take time, but that process will not start if you have a regime like the Syrian regime. Will come to support one group over the other and maintain the tension between them as much as possible so that they can maintain control over the country. That dynamic is now that we lived all our lives under, might be changing. So the change in Syria is not a minor one for Lebanon. One cannot overestimate the significance of that change. It's still yet to be played in Syria itself. We haven't seen how this will evolve in Syria. But if it evolves into a quasi-democratic process, it will have an impact on us a lot, and a positive one, I think.
What I would like to see is the characters that we've lived with in recent history, how they operate under different security arrangements. And we saw the rise and fall of Saad Hariri, where his compromising nature under heavy pressure led to his exile from politics, yet he still remains the sectarian favored politician. And he may well try to come back next year. We've seen the spare wheel scenario. We know what it's like to have Najib Mikati come in and out over time, and now he's out. It's also interesting to see somebody technically outside of the establishment, like Nawaf Salam, who's not sectarian in any way, shape, or form. And Michael, you mentioned it earlier, he doesn't even like to play sectarian politics in a way that is commonplace. How he does in this situation in a year from now. And also the long-term story of how sectarianism evolves. Ta'if includes things that have never materialized. The president has mentioned financial decentralization. The Senate still is a pipe dream.
He said expanded decentralization.
Yes. Expanded decentralization. The Senate is a pipe dream, even though that seems to be what Nawaf Salam should be advocating. He's a constitutional expert. The Ta'if agreement stipulates it too. I'd like to see how this evolves. And I think there is a way to reform it in a way that's meaningful to Lebanon and doesn't dismiss the benefits of secularism or the pluralism nature of Lebanon that your book celebrates. I think the book actually is less a critique of sectarianism per se. I think it's more of a healthier way of looking at Lebanon. And that's what I took from Ghosts of Martyrs Square.
Look, I think we're at a stage in Lebanon where a number of key issues are on the table. Hezbollah's weapons, the fact that the system isn't working. And it's not working why? Why is our system not working? Clearly, it's dysfunctional. It's dysfunctional partly because I think Ta'if was not implemented in its entirety. You mentioned the Senate. The Senate, it only makes sense if you have political deconfessionalism. In other words, Parliament is no longer elected on a sectarian basis. But what does this mean? This means therefore it becomes a little bit more complicated when you deal with sectarian shares in the system. I think sectarianism will always remain in the minds of people. But if you begin to create a system where not everything is sect, and at the same time you keep institutions like a Senate where there is sectarian representation as a security blanket, perhaps it may make a difference. But everything has to be put into the mix. Hezbollah's weapons is essential to get such a process started. There will be no discussion of any kind of, no constitutional discussion until Hezbollah disarms. And all the communities are at the same level and hopefully not tied to foreign powers. But this is a very, this means changing our entire DNA in Lebanon. Will it happen? I'm not willing to put a lot of money on it. But this is the reality. As for Syria, we have to understand Syria today, foreign powers have been interfering in Syrian affairs since the beginning of the conflict in 2011. We're seeing even more of this today. I don't think Syria is out of the woods yet, because I still believe that we know from modern Syrian history that whoever controls Syria to a certain extent controls in a way the Levant. Many countries do not want to allow Turkey to be the dominant power in the Levant. So, all this is going to affect us in one way or another.
Thanks for listening, and thanks for watching. And a kind reminder to hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, like the episode, leave a comment. Engagement helps. And a kind reminder to help contribute if you can, via the PayPal and Patreon links in the episode's details box. Until next time, I'm Rani Shatah. Thanks for listening, and thanks for watching.